the space is really hot area today, with Jeff Bezos just coming back from Sky. Of course, the Sir Richard Branson has his own projects. Elon Musk has a plan to the Mars. So we are really getting, since the Cold War, we're getting the second wave of excitement in space. And I just want to get your observation of what's real, what are we stretching our imagination? I'm just giving your background. I think it would be really great to get your perspective on this.
Thanks for the question. I think you said, it's the second wave, and I think that's absolutely true. The first wave of the conquest of space was driven by states, by this Cold War, by the prestige, Russia against the US, etc. And now we see a second wave, where space is moving from what it was before, so led by public institutions, governments, lots of strategic defense stakes, and now it's moving into commercial space. It becomes commercial on Earth observation, where before military were using data from space, observation data to plan their operations. Today, the commercial industry is using data from space. Farmers are using data from space to optimize the way they use fertilizers and water, for example. Or transportation companies are using data from space to optimize their transport. So it's moving from B2G to B2B, and tomorrow B2B2C. And same for communication. Before it was government communication, then step by step it was broadcast. And now with all the big constellations like Starlink and also the Chinese constellation, we bring directly communication to the consumer, to you, to me. We can buy an antenna, have it on the top of the house, and be connected.
So that's really interesting. But before we go into that detail, which I think is really set the stage for our discussion, it would be really great to kind of talk about you and your career at the multiple areas for Airbus. I think where you started your career for a long time with many of your projects. What I understand is a number of space database services, as well as the drones and others that are out there. So, Helena, if you don't mind, could you give us some background of you?
Okay, so I've been working, as you mentioned, several years at Airbus. When I've been the director of innovation, so I basically shaped for the defense and space part the innovation process, was also one of the catalysts for the creation of Airbus Ventures and the innovation center in Silicon Valley. And I've also then led some programs, so very operational responsibilities where the role is to deliver on time, on cost, on quality. So I led 2 programs. The last one was the Orion ESM, so the European Service Module, which is bringing back people to the moon, and for the first time you have Europe cooperating with the US on this very important program, and Airbus is a prime contractor for the European Space Agency. And I also had the chance to work on the strategy department, so being responsible for basically space strategy. And before Airbus, I was working in the startup environment in France for let's say about 6 years, contributing to create first startup accelerator, first startup co-working spaces, and also investing in startup at early stage. And I've studied mathematics and economics in French Grande École. I will come back to the experience of Airbus because I think something I really take away here is when you work in the space area, it's all about the team. And because it's so complex that you end up with people who know extremely well their area of competence. And when you take decision or when you lead a team, it's all about giving to everyone the possibility to express his or her competence to his or her best abilities. And you end up with people knowing everything about that kind of valve or everything about that fluidic model, and it's a mix of, I would say on the one hand, of course, the mathematics, the modelization, but also the experience, because we are in a world where you don't have fuel series for the time being. This is changing, but for the time being you don't have fuel series. So experience and really focus, someone with 20 years, 30 years of experience that has a very strong wealth actually in that world, and it creates a culture of respect, of humility, of tenacity, because what we do is takes 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, so you work on the same project for years with the same team, and then suddenly it flies. The emotion is extremely high.
Very interesting. So it does give you, given your background in Airbus and also leading the Orion program, which is a project that are currently joint collaboration between US and Europe to bring back the spacecraft. And I guess it'll be the first time Europe will carry humans into space as well, so very significant. And what I'm hearing from you is a project like that is very long term. It requires a intense multidisciplinary collaboration with a science and expertise in each discipline, and they're probably the best in their space, and how you putting them together in a productive, safe way is probably the challenge that you have to manage.
Yeah, it's at the end is the key to success, because I mean, we have seen also, you know, space catastrophic failures happening, with sometimes people being killed, and I mean, just looking at, you know, when accident happen, it's linked to something very, very small, like a very small hole or just a screw that was not absolutely perfectly, you know, put into the hardware. So that's why I come back to this humility and perseverance culture. When something flies, it means that everybody in the chain of operation has done his or her job to his or her best level.
So let's talk a little bit about technology behind space. So for many of us, it's just a rocket that are taking you to out there, and then with the propulsion system, and then eventually coming back. But I think it'll be good to give us, like, what's really exciting disruptor in space today that are enabling all this excitement happen. So maybe you can pick 3 or 4 things that you think is really critical foundation of what's enabling the next frontier.
At the beginning of our discussion, you compared space to the internet. I think that's a great comparison, because exactly as you said, it's moving from, let's say, defense background into commercial background. And exactly like the internet, it's changing, and it will change, I think, in a way that we cannot imagine, the way we live on Earth, and also the way we're going to populate other planets. So in terms of technology, what we've seen happening in the past 15 years, like, you know, in the internet you have waves. You had internet 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. So let's say the 1.0 wave was to make space accessible. And this is the work that Elon Musk has been focusing on. I mean, others also, but really, like, SpaceX brought the price of sending 1 kilogram into space. 15 years ago, it was about $25,000 per kilogram. Today, if you buy a Falcon 9, reusable one, you will buy it like 50 million. It can send 22.6 tons into low Earth orbit. So it means that you have a price per kilogram which is about $2,700, to be compared to the 25,000 10, 15 years ago. And with the new vehicle of Elon Musk, so the Starship, it could go down probably up to 200, 100. So basically, he made space accessible. When you make it accessible, it means entrepreneurs, they can go into that market and they can use space to build new businesses. And this is what company like Planet 10 years ago did. Before, we used to build huge satellites that would take typically 3 to 4 years to being built, that would cost typically double-digit million to 3-digit million euro or dollars price. And Planet did the other way around. They built super small satellites in series, and they revolutionized the way we look at the Earth. Instead of having a very, very high accuracy, which is still needed for military purposes, they said, okay, let's have a very high frequency with low accuracy, but then let's use the power of data to provide information. So they started that 10 years ago, and out of that, I would say, endeavor, you've seen lots of startups popping up, the most successful one being the one really focused on one specific needs. For example, here in Germany, you have one startup called Oratech, which is really focused on detecting in advance fire forests, so that people can be alarmed and warned and then can act faster. So
I heard 3 actually then disruptive forces that are kind of, if I summarize it from your perspective, one is really around the efficiency of the load, which change the economics, are more affordable. And then the second is really around this massive systems to micro satellites, which is much more affordable. And maybe it's not accurate, but I think using data, you can actually consolidate the information. Just like computing is similar. You have huge mainframes. Now you got personal computers. Each computer may not be as powerful, but put it all together, you can have a power of a parallel compute that can be able to exceed the large compute as well. And then I think what I'm hearing is also because of those two economics that are affordable, now you have a new vertical application solution that are coming, which makes it the whole space industry much more commercially viable and attractive, right?
Yes, exactly. And if I may, that's kind of the 1.0. And then we will have the 2.0, which is coming now. So 1.0 was exactly what you said about making it affordable. And so it starting the commercialization of space. And now it has become affordable, we can go further, right? We can further explore. So we can have now, we start to have startups targeting doing business in orbit.
In orbit.
So refueling satellites, moving satellites, also managing debris, because we have lots of space debris which are creating threats. Since space is becoming more and more popular.
Traffic jam.
you need to remove, debris, etc., to avoid. Also, for a military perspective now, you start having, since space is becoming so critical for Earth, in terms not only positioning, but also communication, but also observation and optimizing our activities, you want to protect the space infrastructures. So some DoD are thinking about having huge structure in space where they would store actually satellites in case, for example, GPS is attacked or in case communication infrastructure is attacked, that you don't have to send a launcher here and with a new satellite because this would cost you time. And you cannot afford to have no GPS for, even a few seconds, right? So you would send immediately a satellite which is stored in space to kind of take place or be like a B plan for an infrastructure that would have been disrupted by another player.
So I want to go back to earlier discussion.
Okay.
Because there's a three trend, and I think one that was very important thing that I maybe not captured it as well, which is really about broadband. This proliferation of this micro satellites can enable to potentially provide even more real-time communication link that could be even competing with what we know of telecos infrastructure, right? So 3Gs, 4Gs, and 5Gs. So maybe the future of definition of 6G may not be the way we know it. Maybe it's more satellite-driven. And that might be very interesting discussion as well. I'm sure it's something that people are, I know Elon Musk talks about providing the, I think 2,400 satellites going around the Earth and being able to give you the real-time communication path. So I'd like to hear more about what's your perspective on that. That sounds really exciting, very disruptive. Having the real-time information is getting more critical if you are in IoT, if you are in Industrial 4.0 industry, or even autonomous driving, right? Because when you are in some mountain range, if you don't have your signal, not being able to see the what's going in your mapping as well as the object detection, all those things matters because it's life and death. So I'd like to get your perspective of the importance of the satellite as a communication infrastructure.
So I think it will become more and more critical and more important. So perhaps let's start with IoT and then move to broadband. IoT, the market is simply growing extremely fast, and indeed when you want to track a container, or when you want to track a machine, when you want to have real-time information, for example, about offshore windmills or whatever, you need a communication that is everywhere at every time. And before, space was already part of the answer, but very expensive. And now with what we just spoke about and the fact that access to space has really become much more affordable, you have in the world about, I think if I'm not mistaken, about 30 startups which are focused exactly on this IoT business. So launching microsatellites into space and connecting machines, basically. So this is coming, and this is coming in cooperation with the terrestrial network. So most of the time you would have a partnership between a telco IoT operator and a space IoT operator. if we look now at broadband, I think here we will see a real disruption. It's about connecting people as a first step, and we see here immediately the benefits in India, Africa, also in Europe, in low connectivity areas, for example. But if we look down to the future, for driverless cars, driverless airplanes, I mean, in 15, 20 years, many of our transportation system will be autonomous. You need to be connected broadband. Because at the end, it's step by step, we'll move to, as you said, 6G and then another generation, etc. So at the end, the question is, what is the cost of moving from one generation to another generation? And what's the cost of maintaining the infrastructure? And if you look at the trends, you see that the trends of producing the infrastructure, so the satellites in space, are going down. The cost of launching these satellites into space are also going down. But if you look at the cost of this Earth network, it's not going down like tremendously.
So who do you think will invest in satellite to enable this? Telcos or whole new players could come in?
So what we see currently, it's a mix. If we think about Starlink, so it's funded by SpaceX, so by the investors of SpaceX, basically. And the first one, actually, who really backed Elon Musk on that project was Google, who invested lots of money at the very beginning of the project. Right. So new players, basically, but having a very strong interest in connecting people. Of course, if we think about Google, the more people are connected, the more clients they have. Then if we take another example, which is OneWeb, the people who are backing the OneWeb constellation are basically, on the one hand, the Mittal family, which is very much involved, of course, in the network, in the telecommunication industry in India and in Africa also.
We partner of us, actually.
Exactly. And the other one are SoftBank, which are also, but so that's, here you see in that example that I would say incumbent players are investing into that business because understanding that this is part of the future, and in the other example you had, let's say, new players coming. So I think we'll see both. And just to give an example of figures, because you were mentioning the cost, I wanted to be very concrete on that. Right. In Europe, 4G to 5G was for one country, 1, 2, 3 billions, depending, but that's kind of the order of magnitude for our country. I don't know exactly the total cost of Starlink, but what you can read in the media and about Starlink on OneWeb, etc., it's about 3-4 billion, but it's for the world. Yeah. Right. So already,
different comparisons.
Different comparisons, right? So from what I'd like to add also is that from a strategic perspective, that's super important, and you can imagine that countries like can be China, can be also Western countries, etc. If you provide connectivity to to people or to another country, that's a strategic gift, or that's so some countries are using that to have other things in exchange. Like China is also proposing access to connectivity to, for example, some African countries to get in exchange access to some of their resources. We see that more and more. And so that's the reason why you have now this big player, on the one hand the Americans with SpaceX, on the other hand, let's say a consortium led by the Mittal family, backed by SoftBank, and also the UK government. Then Europe, that will do something probably, having their own constellation, like Europe decided some years ago to have Galileo as a sovereign answer to GPS. Europe is now thinking about doing the same for this broadband connectivity, and China also doing the same. Because at the end, if you own the connectivity, you own the power of access to information, and also all the data that we are sharing more and more.
So basically, really, there are two kind of different mega trends. Then there is this what I call space as a way of, let's say, providing bigger plumbing around the world, right? It's in a way plumbing because it's where it goes down. But then when you get that information through the link, you have to do something with it. All that data have to make sense, and this is where platform companies comes in handy, because that's what they've been doing, and they've been doing it through internet and other means, but now broadband coming from satellite will give them even bigger opportunities to serve. And so the good news is there will be also new services, right? Yes. And services that may not be possible in a traditional sense, but maybe the new services of growing even new bio drug discovery that can be done in non-gravity with no dust or other particles, as well as many other benefits of a vacuum environment, I guess. I'm just making it up, but I'm sure you...
This is completely true. I'd like to give perhaps one example of services really on the Earth, and then we'll go back to low gravity environment. Just to give you one example, so today 70% of our water consumption is irrigation in the world, broadly speaking. And if you combine IoT, so sensors in the earth, plus imagery from space, because you can measure more or less the humidity of the soil, once you have enough data, you can optimize water irrigation probably like 30–40%. So you could significantly decrease, thanks to space, water consumption in the world. And that's starting now, but I wanted to give that example because it's very concrete, and we have, nowadays, all the media are saying, okay, space, these billionaires going to space, it's destroying the environment. No, generally speaking, space is here to serve our needs on Earth, connectivity needs, but also sustainable needs, and that's very concrete example of that. Then on microgravity, that's exactly the second wave we are talking about. Space has become accessible, meaning we can do much more experiment in space. And I just give two examples. If you send a mouse in space, the mouse is going to age way faster than on Earth. But basically, the muscles they atrophy a little bit because you don't do, even if you do exercise, etc. You don't have gravity, and when you have gravity, you have kind of natural exercise of your muscles just because
you have to resist.
And so you just inverted comma become older kind of faster. Right. Space is an amazing laboratory to test drugs, medicines against aging, and to see very fast, what kind of effects they have. Agriculture, which is very important nowadays with, climate change, etc. If you bring some plants into space, and this has been done recently by an entrepreneur, and he brought some wine, actually, salmon, so one plants into space, and then he brought it back to the Earth. Microgravity is the highest level of stress that the plants they can experience, because that's something you absolutely don't have on Earth, and this is critical for the way the plant is growing and nurturing itself. So when they are confronted with microgravity, when the plants come back, they are much more resistant with regards to thermal changes. They are much more resistant with regards to water scarcity, so that basically they use less water, and they also can resist some diseases because they've kind of survived such a high level of stress that they've adapted to the very, very high level of stress, and when we bring them back, they can adapt to a more stressful environment on the Earth, basically. So this is currently, we are currently at the beginning of this kind of research, but since sending these kind of experiments to space has become much more affordable and will continue to become more affordable, then this is opening new doors for industry like Bayer, for example, to, let's say, search for plants that will be more resistant, that would use less water, etc.
So space as a lab that can accelerate some of our innovations that have constrained in Earth's environment. Yes. That's really fascinating as well. So let's talk a little bit about the topics around your Microbiome Foundation, which is a slight change, because I think it's interesting. I didn't know that much about microbiome, but I understand that humans and all of us have a whole tons of microbiome that are going through, and we only understand very small portion of what's actually in our body. And it's same thing in the plant and animals. And in fact, last year we had this competition called Extreme Tech Challenge, which is the largest startup competition for the supporting the tech for good. And last year's one of the winners was a Microgen, which I interviewed actually the CEO just prior to you, So it's a bit fresh to me. The idea was really using the microbiome as a way to coating your seed so they can protect from the toxic soils. And so there seems to be, there's a lot of discovery going on in microbiome and its own applications and what it means, how does it relate to humans, all that type of thing. So now that's given that background, I can see why you would be interested in this, but I'd like to get your project and what you're trying to accomplish there.
Okay. So perhaps a little bit about why this foundation, and it started actually because one of my best friends was very ill, and we created a foundation focused on her specific disease, and so that was 10 years ago approximately, and what we learned through that is what medical research was super helpful on the one hand, but also simply the way you would take care of your body was as impactful. And the way you would take care of your body is actually very much linked to how microbiome is functioning, what you eat basically. So because of that, we said, okay, we need to get this, let's say, more known in the public opinion, and also instead of funding only that specific disease, why don't we try to fund research on microbiome, because the impact is higher and really very important. So that's how it started. So currently we have two main areas of activities. One is indeed, let's say, for the public opinion, to explain to people how they can basically improve their microbiotic environment so that they get a better health. And also we have a research area, and one project we currently fund is against autism. You know, this disease, it's everywhere, right. And actually I cannot say it's scientifically proven yet because we don't have the series, but there are some experiments that have been done with children that basically through what they were eating, they changed the equilibrium of their microbiotic environment, and this has significantly improved their autism sign. So one project we fund is specifically focused on that, so that we can try to prove scientifically how you could change the microbiotic environment of your children so that autism is, let's say, less strong. Right.
Clearly, I think eating matters a lot, and the lack of biodiversity due to the industrialization of our agricultural society of the last 100 years, I think has a profound impact on our microbiome. I think that has the issues on several things, including immune systems, as well as some of other phenomena like autism increasing than ever before. So these are probably some examples of very interesting subject to be explored. So that's really an interesting subject. You also have this project called Karman project, which I think is like a space for creating better world, but I'd like to get your more view on this as well.
Yeah, so the Karman project, basically, it's another foundation. It's headquartered here in Berlin, and our focus is to create trust and cooperation between the one who shape the future of the space industry. And we believe at the Karman project that, okay, competition will exist, war potentially will exist, but we'd like to create, let's say, a world in space where cooperation still exists. And we think that the world will be very different if we have people from all over the world who know each other as persons, not only as CEO of that company or the director of this agency or whatever, but just as person. Very concretely, we select every year 15 people around the world, so top leaders. As an example, we have this year an astronaut from NASA. We have this year two CEOs of one of the most successful Chinese space companies. Last year we had the astronaut Thomas Pesquet as a fellow, the deputy CEO of Eutelsat. So top leaders, below 45. We organize for them 4 days all together. We start by inviting high-level speakers who have nothing to do with space, so that after 2-3 days they get a better idea of what is our world. Right. So that as space leader they can become better leaders because they get inspired by other leaders, and also they have a better understanding of what is our world and what's at stake. And then we organize kind of workshop where they dream together. So you will have Chinese, Americans, people from all over the world, top leaders in space, thinking together, collaborating about how the world could look like in 20 years. And after that, let's say, year of fellowship, where we have also other events, I will not detail everything, we ask each of them to take a personal commitment to make space a better place. So a 1-year commitment that we support also with some funding if needed, so that they create something cooperative that...
Very human side of it.
Exactly, exactly.
So let me ask you this really, really great project, and I think clearly through better understanding, we are all humans.
At the end, yes.
You know, at the end, and I think through that we'll have a better understanding of each other. I would love to hear your perspective of space in, let's say, 2050.
Okay. So I think some of us will be living on Mars somehow. I think also some of us will be different because we'll be augmented humans. So the life out there will be made of augmented humans and lots of robots. I think we'll have mastered nuclear propulsion. Because today with chemical propulsion it will take you 6 months to go to Mars, and this is not a way to go to Mars, and you have to wait like 2 years for the next trip and etc. We will see probably in 10, 15 years solar-powered base station around the moon and then around Mars, so gathering the energy from the sun and then being emitted to the moon and to Mars, meaning perhaps in 2050, perhaps we will have this solar power station beaming to the Earth, and this would solve a lot of energy problems. And then I think space tourism will just be normal.
So we talked about Mars, but do you
Yes.
think we also could go some other galaxies?
Yeah, but I think this requires a travel capacity that we have to.
We need to have a
have
speed of light.
Yeah, because or as you see in the science fiction comics or stories, like capacity also to regenerate ourselves that we don't master yet either. But I think it's super hard already. And it will take a lot of time for us to change Mars, because if we want to live there, we'll have to change it, change the climate, etc.
Let's change a little bit about you, our career. You have decided to leave Airbus.
Yes.
And you are going to start your own tech company, space tech. So you're becoming an entrepreneur once again, I think. So I'd like to get your perspective about innovation and investment. Where do you get excited about in terms of the space you're going to be looking?
Yeah. So investment in space has changed a lot. And if you would look like 10, 15 years ago, you would have investment in space startups that would have been like perhaps 100 between 1 and 10 million basically per year. Now it's about 7 billion. So within just a very short time frame, it has increased a lot, because all what we said at the beginning and the creation startups, etc. I've been myself investing in space. I've created an investment company 4 years ago, which has currently 6 space techs participation. So investing in space has some similarities and some differences with investing in, I would say, normal tech startup. Similarities because at the end you invest on an entrepreneur, on a person, on a vision of this person, also the capacity of this person to, when shit happens, when difficulties arrive, to listen, to pivot, and then to overcome the difficulties. So I think this is true everywhere, space or tech or whatever. What's a bit different in space, of course, is the time frame. So for that, we have seen the market basically maturing. First, the people who were investing in space were really like risk-taking funds. Now, on the one hand, the space tech entrepreneurs have adapted. They try to have revenues as fast as possible, much faster, I would say. So within a time frame of typically for deep tech, 3 to 4 years. And second, we've seen also the financial ecosystem changing, with some funds now which are longer, not the typical 10 years time, but 12 years, 14 years, so that it kind of is more adapted, I would say, to deep tech investment.
They say the money follows money, right? So when you said that space is finally for commercialization possibility, clearly the investment is also following because they see an opportunity for commercialization. I think it just endorses your comments earlier on this. Why don't I also change the subject a little bit about the working female in space. When you're working in the Airbus and your Orion and other project, how balanced in terms of gender representation in space industry?
Yeah, so I would not say that it's super balanced because we are. So just to take an example, Sohn, on the Orion ESM, so the European Service Module, we are a team at Airbus about 200 people, and I think we are. I don't want to say something wrong, but I think we're about 10 females or something like that. I mean, with operational responsibilities, not communication or HR or etc. And if I look at executive level within the space, part of Airbus, it's less than one hand. It's like 1, 2. So yeah, with operational responsibilities, right? Not. I don't know the reason for that, but what I see is it makes a difference and it doesn't make a difference. It makes a difference because we have a little bit a different approach, of course, than men, and these diversities, I think, bring a lot to the team. I was explaining at the beginning the necessity to speak up when there is a problem, the necessity to find together solutions. And it's a bit a cliche to say that females are good for communication and for cooperation, etc. But it's very important when you have a problem that you don't have this fight of egos, but yet just that people calm down and can express their doubts, can express where they see risks, can express that perhaps here they're not so sure about their calculation, can express that perhaps there is a risk that they've not seen, that perhaps they were wrong. And having some females here create that's my experience, that is a different atmosphere where people feel safer to express their doubts, and this is super important for program management. So that's making, I would say, a difference. This is where I think it's very important to have diverse teams. Because sometimes otherwise when you have problems you have clashes of ego. Again, it's a caricature, but these are things I've seen very concretely on the ground.
There you go. When you are crisis course, it doesn't matter, right? You just work together. But the other thing also for you is your mother with 4 children, I understand. So what other advice do you have in terms of balancing between family and career and raising all that?
Yeah, so first I think I couldn't know what I could do if I wouldn't have a husband who is hyper respectful about who I am and what I'm doing. So it really is a balance in the couple. There were times where he needed to really focus on his job and making a career, and then I kind of stepped down, and now it's kind of a little bit my turn and he's more like stepping down. So I think it's super important as a couple to be able to have a very open and respectful discussion about what you want as a person and how the other, with all the love he has for you, can support you in your dreams. Then what I've experienced also, and this is very specific to, at least in my experience, to Germany, I think it's also true in other countries. I've been hiding for quite a time that I had children.
Really?
Because this would have been perceived as not serious. Either you choose to have a career or you choose to have children, and then you have no problem that you choose to have a career and you can be a hyper successful woman, but then you need to be serious and focus about that and not kind of being distracted by having children. So at the end, the advice I would give is just know yourself, what's important for you as a woman. And I think it's super important to be honest towards yourself, honest towards your partner, so that this can be built together. So love is not a question of time, at least it depends on the people, but I think it's not a question of time, it's a question of giving trust and of being 200% there when you are there for the one you love. So I would just advise not to be afraid of who you are, but try to express who you are.
Very good advice. I think that's really appreciate that. That's the kind of subject we don't talk too much about, right? But often you have to deal with reality of the jobs, cultural expectations. But I think what you said is right. You got to know what you want, and you got to be comfortable with what you want to do. Yeah, okay, that's really great. Well, you know, I think you are my first space rocket lady for interviews. I really appreciate it. I think I learned a lot, and I'm sure my audience will learn a lot about your really diverse background and experience, but it's really what's coming and what's exciting in front of us. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.